So I am here with a tutorial and I am here to draw eyes for you guys. I think for my style in particular, eyes are a very important part, and I think that they're probably one of the most fun things to draw in general, and I really want to showcase my sort of workflow and how I would pause. So this is me from the future. So just to clarify, this tutorial is about drawing the eye from reference and steps that I would go through. It's not about stylizing, but more so analyzing the structure from a reference. Unpause. I think I'm a bad teacher, so I don't know if this is gonna go very well. But other than that, let's get started. Class is in session. So the first step of drawing anything is reference. So get your references, don't draw without them. Especially if you're learning. But yes, always draw with references because references are your best friend. So the first thing that you really want to observe is the angle of the eye that you're drawing. As you can see from here, it's pretty straight on, so I'm just going to draw that indicator line. And then the second step that I always look at is the top lid that we're looking at. So this area right here, I either divide it up into 2 or 3 sections depending on how the structure of the eye is. For this one, I could see 3 distinct planes, and I'll just set my guidelines just so I know where to start and where to end. So there's one like right here, one plane right here, and then one down here connecting both sections. But yeah, top lid, divide it into straight line sections to make it easier. And then next you want to see the angle of the bottom lid. For this one, I can divide it up into 2 lines, so this one and then that one. That's too much of an angle, I'd say. A bit less. This one and this one. Then that's pretty much the basic structure of the eye, and then you have your pupil, which is a complete circle. Something like that. You could just erase the top section. Erase that initial guideline that I had. And then for this person's eye fold, it's completely separated from the eye and fairly large. So it'd just be something along the lines of that. And then for the upper and lower lids, they're a 3D section. So the best way I can think about it is your eye is a sphere and then your hands are the lids. So your hands aren't 2D, they're 3D shapes, so you're gonna have some depth here. I like to have a little indicator line here and at the bottom just so I can add that depth when I'm rendering it. And then of course you have your little eye bags, and that is practically the basic structure of the eye. Then you'll have the eyebrow over top, and you can refine this section here to include that tear duct and get the shape right. And you can add a little tear duct indicator here. But yeah, that's the basic structure of the eye done. And typically from this point I would start to render. So I like to add a multiply blending mode to my sketch. Pause again. Sorry. So just to clarify, multiply blending mode is a very useful tool in a lot of drawing apps like Photoshop, Paint Tool, Procreate. So the best way that I can describe the multiply blending mode is car tint on windows. So let's say you had like a blue tint on your car window. Anything behind the window will be a lot darker and in that blue tone, and that's similar to what the multiply blending mode is. So let's say you filled in your layer with blue, everything below that is gonna have a bluish darker tinge to it. And then underneath I'll just grab a random color. So my first step, what I do when I render is I do the iris and color that in. And a lot of blood flow happens around the eyes, so a lot of the areas are gonna have a reddish tinge to them, and the actual white part of the eye is gonna be a slightly lighter color, so let's just indicate that. And then you're obviously gonna have your pupil in the middle. That would be around here somewhere. But yeah, so once that you have your basic colors down, you can sort of start to add in your basic shading. So I like to take this sort of in-between color between the skin tone and the red that I chose and use that for my shading. So what you want to do is add a new layer on top of your sketch and everything else, and then add a multiply setting to it and just go in and get those basic folds, that basic shading in. Just indicate to yourself where the darkest parts of the drawing would be. The dark part underneath where this crease is. And it's going to be a little darker in this section here and along the fold. Then as well under the eye. And then you're going to have a little shadow in this pocket where the tear duct is as well. Just because that part of the eye is very recessed in. And then it's around this point of the drawing where I start to add a little bit of detail into the iris. And when you want to color an iris that has a lot of details in it, you want to follow this radial pattern that the eye sort of follows. So everything sort of emanating from the center. And in most eyes, you're going to have a dark ring along the outside of the iris and as well as around the pupil. And you just want to keep refining that until it looks alright. But every line that you do, you want to follow this radial pattern or else it looks weird. So that is pretty much all of the basic rendering done. And now at this point, what I like to do is add my shadows, my cast shadow of each of the objects interacting with one another, and also highlight the lighting that goes on as well. The rule of thumb for me, whenever I'm shading anything on the outside of the eye, surrounding the eye, not the actual eye inside, I'm gonna have a warmer shadow color. So you can pick a red, an orange, a yellow. And this is just for me. This is how my workflow is. And then anything inside the eye on this white area will have a cool lighting. So I'd use like a blue, a purple, something like that. But yes, again, add another multiply layer over. And we're gonna darken the surroundings of the eye first. So we take a warm color and just indicate those shadow areas. And at this point, you can kind of start to see the form of the eye taking shape. I'm just going to make this section a little more saturated and a little more red. And then add another multiply layer. And we're going to do the shading on the inside of the eye. And like I said before, whenever I do shading on the inside, we like to do a cool shading. So I will choose a bluish gray color here and shade the inside. And you kind of want to shade the eye like a sphere. Typically, you're going to have a darker shadow on top because of the cast shadow of the eyelid. Then you also have this minimal shading as you would shade any kind of sphere. And then you can even go a little darker just to accentuate that fold at the top. And then you're going to have a dark section here where the crease is as well. And then it's okay to bleed some of that bluish tone out onto the bottom as here as well. I'll just deepen the shadows and accentuate the structure even more. And then I just want to bring out some of these reds a bit more because I'm looking at the reference and it is barely saturated. So I just go on with a multiply layer again and just add those colors. Whenever I want to add color or something to a drawing that's practically already rendered, you can do it fairly easily by creating a multiply layer on top and adding the color you want. So it's not a problem if you missed it in prior drawing steps, you can always add it in after. Our middle stage rendering is practically almost done. I'm just gonna add a multiplier layer on top and just give a nice pink hue to everything. And then just let me lessen that a little bit and lighten that up. And it's at this point where you can now add your eyelashes. I think that eyelashes is not something you should really focus on in the initial stages, but they're a great cosmetic to add after the fact once everything else is looking good. So when you add your lashes, I'm just gonna go with some random brown color. They follow this sort of, again, a radial pattern. So converge towards the center, but as they fan out, they're gonna go out like the rays of the sun. But you also gotta remember that the eyelashes sort of curl outwards, so be mindful of that. They're not just gonna stick straight out like this. Following that radial pattern. And I like to group my eyelashes when I render them in little groups of like 3 or 4, while also having some strays on their own. Really help to give a little variety to the eye. At this point, it's just sort of personal preference of how you want your lashes to look. Since this eyelid is sort of turned down a bit more, the lashes near this side of the eye, they're gonna turn downwards into the eye. And then for the bottom lashes, that's sort of the line the lashes would follow. You just want to do that radial pattern, do clumps here and there, single strands some places. And the bottom lashes are definitely a lot less full than the top ones, so keep that in mind as well. Once you finish this point, you can do your favorite part, adding highlights. And highlights are quite simple. Do little specks in the eye, along the lash line as well. And then accentuating some of those creases in the face, and then in this light spot right below the eye fold as well, and then above there. And yeah, that's future me here for some more clarification. So the reason that I chose the lighting highlight places that I did based off this reference is because the lighting in this reference was pretty straight on, so anything that is closest to the light would have been highlighted. So in this particular case, it was this portion of the eye right here, the top lid, as well as the bottom lid, because these structures of the eye would have been closest to the light if the light was shining directly right in front of it. It's pretty much basic rendering and structure of the eye. And then obviously you're gonna have your eyebrows up here, but this is not an eyebrow tutorial. And also something that I didn't mention, a lot of people, they leave this outside edge of the eye very harsh, but if you look at the eye in any reference, there's this subtle blur and transition between the white of the eye and the iris. So what I like to do, just blur it a little bit, blur those lines, just so it's not as harsh of a transition and it's a lot more visually appealing. And yeah, basic eye. So hey guys, it is me from the future. This would be a very long video if I didn't break this up into separate parts. So I'm gonna break this video up into 2 more parts. The second part will be pretty much the same as the first video, but we'll be drawing a different type of eye. We'll be drawing a monolid. And then the third part of the video will act almost as a summary and sort of how I would stylize from this basic rendering and structure. But yeah, so 2 more parts will be coming out very soon. I'm sorry to break it up, but I hope you guys enjoyed this first tutorial, and yeah, this has been Doodles.